When you start looking closely at the dynamics of a marriage where a husband is narcissistic, one of the most painful things a wife experiences is constant criticism and belittling. It's subtle at first. It might be a joke disguised as humor, or a passing comment about her choices, her appearance, or the way she handles daily tasks. He might say something like, "Are you really going to wear that?" Or, "I don't think you can handle this." On the surface, these words might seem harmless, even trivial, but over time, they chip away at her self-confidence and her sense of worth. Every word, every dismissive glance, every sarcastic remark is carefully calculated to make her feel small, to make her question herself. The thing about narcissistic criticism is that it's relentless yet unpredictable. One day, she might receive praise, or at least what seems like praise, but the next day, a slight misstep, a different choice, or even just existing in the wrong mood, could trigger a barrage of judgment. And because it's inconsistent, it keeps her on edge. She starts to second guess every decision, every word she speaks, every move she makes. She wonders, did I do something wrong? Did I make him angry without realizing it? This constant self-monitoring is exhausting. It slowly erodes her confidence until she feels trapped inside her own mind, afraid to act freely or express herself without scrutiny. What makes this pattern particularly destructive is the way it's often disguised as concern or advice. He might say, "I'm just trying to help you improve," or "I want the best for you." But underneath those words lies control and judgment. He wants her to see herself through his eyes, through a lens that magnifies flaws and diminishes accomplishments. Every achievement she has, every decision she makes, is either minimized or reframed to make her feel she's never quite enough. And the tragic part is, because he mixes occasional compliments with constant criticism, she clings to the rare moments of approval, hoping for the recognition and love she craves, even when it's rarely genuine. This is not just about words, it's about power. Every sarcastic comment, every dismissive tone, every critique, no matter how small, is a reminder of control. It's a psychological weight that follows her everywhere, making her feel less than she truly is. She begins to internalize his narrative about her worth, and that's when the damage becomes more than emotional. It becomes a silent imprisonment. She starts believing that she isn't smart enough, pretty enough, capable enough to make her own choices. She doubts herself in ways she never would have before meeting him. And here's the harsh reality: the criticism is rarely about actual mistakes. It's about maintaining dominance. It's about reminding her, consciously or unconsciously, that she exists under his authority. The more she feels inadequate, the more he feels powerful. The cycle is cruel because it's invisible to outsiders. Friends, family, even casual acquaintances might see a smiling couple, a man who seems charming and articulate, and fail to recognize the steady erosion happening behind closed doors. Meanwhile, she bears the burden, silently enduring a constant assault on her self-esteem. But here's what she must understand: her value is not determined by his words. His criticism is a reflection of his insecurities and his need to dominate, not a measure of her worth or her abilities. The power to reclaim her confidence begins when she recognizes this pattern for what it is. Every belittling remark is not truth, it's manipulation. Every sarcastic comment is not reality, it's a reflection of someone else's toxic mindset. And the moment she can separate his words from her identity, she begins the first step toward freedom. No one deserves to feel small, to doubt their own value, or to live in constant fear of another person's judgment. When a wife can see clearly that his words are designed to control, she can start to rebuild her voice, her self-respect, and her courage. And once that clarity is achieved, she begins to live not under the shadow of his criticism, but in the light of her own self-worth. Because no one, not even the most charmingly cruel narcissist, can define the power, intelligence, or beauty that belongs inherently to her. When you look closely at the behavior of a narcissistic husband, one thing becomes painfully clear: a lack of empathy. He struggles, not sometimes, not occasionally, but consistently, to understand or care about his wife's feelings. When she comes to him, vulnerable and open, hoping for comfort or support, he often responds with indifference, sarcasm, or outright dismissal. She might be expressing sadness, anxiety, or frustration, and instead of feeling heard, she encounters a wall. His inability, or refusal, to empathize creates a deep sense of isolation, as if her emotions are invisible, irrelevant, or even inconvenient. This lack of empathy is not just a personality quirk, it's a deliberate pattern. He may appear attentive for a moment, but that attention is rarely genuine. Often, it serves another purpose to maintain control or to manipulate. He might pretend to care when it benefits him, when it helps him appear reasonable or loving in front of others, or when it serves his own narrative. But when real emotions arise, emotions that require patience, understanding, or compromise, he withdraws, and she is left to navigate her pain alone, carrying the weight of feelings that are minimized, mocked, or ignored. The consequences of this emotional neglect are profound. Over time, a wife begins to question the validity of her own feelings. She starts wondering, am I overreacting? Am I too sensitive? Maybe I shouldn't feel this way at all. The constant dismissal chips away at her emotional resilience, leaving her vulnerable to self-doubt and confusion. She begins to internalize the idea that her needs and emotions are less important than his, that expressing herself is somehow a burden. And in that quiet surrender, a dangerous pattern takes hold. She loses touch with her own emotional truth. What makes this even more difficult is how cleverly he disguises his lack of empathy. He may show flashes of charm, offer words that seem comforting, or act affectionate at unexpected moments. These brief glimpses of connection are like bait. They keep her hoping, keep her believing that the person she married still exists somewhere beneath the control and manipulation. She clings to these moments because they feel like a promise, a glimpse of the man she thought he was. But the cycle inevitably returns to coldness, indifference, and emotional withdrawal. Each time, her heart bears the weight of disappointment, confusion, and hurt. It's important to understand that this is not about malice alone, it's about self-centeredness. Narcissistic husbands are often so wrapped up in their own needs, their own ego, and their own narratives that they cannot, or will not, see the humanity of their wives. The concept of shared emotional experience is foreign to them. While a healthy relationship is built on mutual understanding, care, and empathy, this dynamic is fundamentally one-sided. She gives, hopes, and seeks connection. He takes, dismisses, and controls. Yet, even in the midst of this emotional neglect, a wife has the power to reclaim her sense of worth. She must recognize that his inability to empathize is not a reflection of her value, but a reflection of his limitations. She does not have to internalize his indifference. She does not have to accept emotional starvation as normal or deserved. Her feelings are valid, her needs are legitimate, and her voice deserves to be heard, not just by him, but by herself first and foremost. The first step toward healing is acknowledging the truth. She is entitled to her emotions. She is entitled to care, to understanding, and to emotional safety. And once she begins to honor her own feelings, she begins to see clearly where the patterns of neglect and manipulation exist. She gains the clarity to set boundaries, to protect her heart, and to rebuild a sense of emotional security that has nothing to do with his approval. She may have lived for years under the shadow of a man who cannot love her in the way she deserves, but she has the power to cultivate love for herself, and through that self-respect, she begins to shine again. She begins to recognize that while he may never understand, she does not need his empathy to validate her existence. She can feel deeply, live fully, and embrace her emotions as a gift, not a burden, reclaiming a sense of self that is untouchable by the coldness of another. Because at the end of the day, no lack of empathy, no indifference, and no manipulation can diminish the truth that she is worthy of love, respect, and understanding, and that power, once recognized, is hers to hold forever. When we talk about a narcissistic husband, one of the most controlling and damaging behaviors is his constant need to manipulate and dominate. It's not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's subtle, creeping into everyday life in ways that make a wife feel restricted, unsure, and second, guessing herself. He may control finances, deciding how money is spent or saved, often making her feel incapable of handling even the smallest financial decision. He may dictate friendships, subtly undermining the people she trusts, suggesting that certain friends are a bad influence, or questioning her judgment for wanting to spend time with them. Slowly, she begins to feel trapped, as though her world has been narrowed by invisible walls, walls that only he has the power to remove, or so it seems. Manipulation takes many forms, but its core is always the same: maintaining power. He may twist situations to make himself appear right, using logic, charm, or even guilt to assert dominance. When disagreements arise, she may find herself apologizing for things she didn't do or accepting blame for problems he created. He creates a narrative where he is always the victim or always the one who knows best. And she is left navigating the maze of his reality, constantly questioning her own perspective. It's exhausting, it's mentally draining, and over time, it begins to erode her confidence, making her feel incapable of making decisions without his guidance, or worse, his approval. One of the most insidious aspects of this control is the way it undermines autonomy. He wants her to depend on him, to feel that she cannot manage life without his constant input. Even decisions that should be hers, what she wears, what she eats, where she goes, how she spends her time, become opportunities for him to assert dominance. And when she resists, he may escalate using emotional manipulation, threats, or passive-aggressive behavior to reestablish his authority. The result is a constant state of tension as she learns to navigate life cautiously, fearful of triggering anger, criticism, or withdrawal. Manipulation in a narcissistic relationship is rarely obvious to outsiders. He may appear loving, caring, and supportive to family, friends, or coworkers. On the surface, he seems reasonable, rational, even charming, but behind closed doors, the reality is entirely different. She may feel like she is walking on eggshells, constantly anticipating his mood and adjusting her behavior to avoid conflict. This duality, the public facade versus the private reality, leaves her isolated. She begins to question her perceptions, wondering if she is imagining things or being overly sensitive. And that self-doubt is exactly what he wants. It keeps her under his control, dependent not just on his approval, but on his version of reality. What is crucial to understand is that manipulation is not a reflection of her inadequacy. It is a reflection of his desire to maintain power. The control he exerts is about ego, insecurity, and a need to dominate, not about her well-being. Every rule, every restriction, every subtle or overt attempt to steer her life is about reinforcing his sense of authority. And yet, even within this suffocating environment, there is hope. She can reclaim her autonomy one decision at a time. She can recognize the patterns for what they are and understand that she does not have to live according to someone else's rules, especially when those rules are designed to diminish her. The path to freedom begins with awareness. When she sees clearly how manipulation works, she can detach from the guilt, the fear, and the confusion that he has cultivated. She can remind herself that her voice, her choices, and her life belong to her, not to him. By asserting boundaries, she slowly rebuilds the independence that was stolen from her, learning that making her own decisions does not make her selfish or wrong. It makes her whole. No one should feel that their life is controlled by another. No one should live in constant doubt of their own judgment, and no one should endure the subtle suffocation of a manipulative hand. And as she recognizes her own strength, she begins to live fully and freely, discovering that the power to shape her own life has always been hers to claim. When you begin to understand that the patterns of a narcissistic husband, one of the most insidious behaviors you encounter is gaslighting. The deliberate twisting of reality to make his wife question her own perceptions, memories, and even her sanity. It starts subtly. He might say something like, "That never happened," or "You're imagining things again." At first, she doubts herself, wondering if she really did misremember, mishear, or overreact. But over time, these small, repeated manipulations begin to erode her confidence, her clarity, and her sense of self. The very foundation of who she is and what she knows starts to feel unstable, and she begins to rely on him to tell her what is true and what is false. Gaslighting is a psychological tool designed to gain power and control. Every time he denies an event, twists a story, or shifts blame, he reinforces his dominance and diminishes her ability to trust herself. She may recall a conversation, a promise, or an act of kindness that he now denies ever occurred. Or perhaps he accuses her of causing a problem that he created, convincing her that she is the source of tension, conflict, or disappointment. It's relentless and it's intentional. The goal is not to clarify or resolve, but to confuse, destabilize, and ultimately control. The danger of gaslighting is that it doesn't just affect her perception of events. It attacks her inner sense of reality. She begins to second guess her memory, her instincts, and her decisions. She may start to apologize for things she didn't do or feel guilty for expressing legitimate feelings. Every interaction becomes a test. Did she remember correctly? Did she overreact? Is he really telling the truth this time? And as self-doubt creeps in, the emotional toll grows heavier. She carries the burden silently, wondering if she is truly losing her mind, questioning her own worth, and struggling to make sense of a life that feels increasingly surreal. What makes gaslighting especially cruel is the way it's often mixed with moments of charm or affection. He may occasionally acknowledge her feelings, admit a mistake, or express love in ways that feel genuine. These brief flashes of connection are confusing. They keep her hoping that things can be normal, that the man she married is still somewhere beneath the manipulation. But the pattern inevitably returns denial, distortion, blame, and control. Each cycle leaves her more uncertain and more dependent on his version of reality, reinforcing his power over her mind and her emotions. Gaslighting also isolates her. Because the distortions of reality are subtle and often invisible to outsiders, friends and family may dismiss her concerns or fail to understand the full extent of the manipulation. He presents himself as reasonable, loving, or even concerned, while behind closed doors, she is struggling to hold on to her sense of truth. This isolation deepens the psychological trap, making her feel that she is alone in navigating the confusion, and that no one else can validate her experiences. But even in the face of such intense psychological abuse, there is hope and there is power. The first step toward reclaiming her life is recognition. When she identifies the patterns of gaslighting, when she names the behavior and sees it clearly for what it is, she begins to separate her reality from his manipulations. She begins to trust her instincts again, to honor her perceptions, and to assert her voice. Each time she affirms her truth, she chips away at the control he has sought to impose over her mind. The path forward is not easy, but it is transformative. She learns to establish boundaries, to hold firm in her understanding of reality, and to refuse to accept blame or distortion that does not belong to her. She begins to rebuild the confidence that has been systematically undermined and to cultivate a sense of self that is independent of his manipulations. And in doing so, she discovers a truth that no gaslighting, no distortion, and no manipulation can ever erase her mind. Her perception and her reality are hers alone. In the end, she learns that clarity is freedom. By trusting herself, by honoring her feelings, and by refusing to be controlled by someone else's distorted version of truth, she reclaims the life, the peace, and the dignity that were never meant to be taken from her. When you look at the dynamics of a marriage with a narcissistic husband, one of the most painful realities is emotional withholding and coldness. It's a slow, deliberate form of control, almost surgical in the way it targets a wife's sense of security and belonging. Affection, attention, and love are not freely given. They are tools, rewards, or punishments used to manipulate and maintain dominance. She never knows when she will receive warmth, praise, or connection, and that unpredictability keeps her in a constant state of tension, hoping for approval that may never come. One day he may seem attentive, kind, or charming. The next day he withdraws, indifferent to her needs, feelings, or accomplishments. And in that cycle, She begins to feel as though her heart, her efforts, and her very being are never enough. This kind of emotional withholding is devastating because it attacks the human need for connection. Every person, every marriage thrives on mutual support, empathy, and understanding. But in this environment, those essentials are absent or twisted into a tool of control. She may try to reach out, to express love, to seek intimacy, only to be met with coldness, sarcasm, or indifference. Over time, the absence of consistent affection erodes her confidence. She starts asking herself, am I not lovable? Is there something inherently wrong with me? The cruel genius of this manipulation is that it makes her feel responsible for his emotional distance, when in reality, it has nothing to do with her and everything to do with his inability to connect genuinely. Narcissistic husbands often use emotional withdrawal as punishment. If she disagrees with him, questions him, or asserts her independence, he may respond by shutting down, ignoring her, or creating a cold silence that communicates more than words ever could. She feels the weight of rejection, even if no words are spoken. The silence becomes a weapon, a signal that she has done something wrong, that she has failed in some unspoken way. And because this coldness is often accompanied by intermittent warmth or charm, she remains trapped in the hope that things can return to normal, that his love can be earned or restored by her own effort. It is essential to recognize that this pattern is not about love or care. It is about control. Every act of emotional withholding reinforces his power and undermines her sense of stability. She may feel like she is walking a tightrope, constantly trying to anticipate his moods and reactions, striving to gain approval that is conditional at best. And the longer this cycle continues, the more she internalizes the idea that her happiness and security are dependent on his fluctuating affection, rather than on her own worth and strength. The pain of this experience is compounded by the fact that it is invisible to the outside world. To friends, family, and colleagues, he may appear loving, generous, and attentive, while she quietly endures the emotional distance and coldness behind closed doors. This duality leaves her feeling isolated, misunderstood, and powerless. She may even begin to question her own judgment, wondering if she is imagining the coldness or overreacting to the emotional neglect. And that self-doubt only reinforces the cycle, giving him more control over her emotions and sense of reality. But even in the midst of such manipulation, there is hope and there is power. The first step toward healing is awareness, seeing the pattern for what it truly is. She must understand that his emotional coldness is a reflection of his character, not her value. She does not need to earn love that is withheld or manipulate her own behavior to gain fleeting moments of approval. Her worth is not contingent on his recognition, and her happiness does not depend on his unpredictable responses. By reclaiming her own emotional autonomy, she begins to break free from the cycle of control. She can nurture her own needs, cultivate self-love, and surround herself with connections that are genuine, reciprocal, and affirming. She can remind herself that her feelings are valid, her desires are important, and her heart deserves care and warmth, not manipulation. And in that reclamation, she discovers a truth that no withdrawal, no coldness, and no emotional punishment can ever take away. She is inherently worthy, and she has the strength to protect her heart and preserve her dignity. In the end, the power to live with emotional freedom does not come from him, it comes from her. And once she embraces that power, no act of coldness can ever diminish her light or define her value. When examining the behavior of a narcissistic husband, one of the most disorienting realities for a wife is the stark contrast between public image and private reality. To the world, he may appear charming, successful, attentive, even loving. Friends, family, coworkers, and neighbors see a man who seems to have it all together, a husband who appears to care, a partner who is engaged and dependable. But behind closed doors, the truth is entirely different. The warm smiles, the well-timed compliments, the public displays of affection, they are often calculated performances, carefully crafted to maintain appearances and manipulate perception. And in that private world, she experiences the very opposite: control, criticism, neglect, manipulation, and emotional abuse. This duality is confusing and isolating. She struggles to reconcile the man everyone else sees with the man she knows at home. How can someone who seems so charming and capable in public treat her with indifference, coldness, or even cruelty behind closed doors? The inconsistency creates doubt. Not about him, but about herself. She may wonder if she is overreacting, if she is misinterpreting his behavior, or if she is imagining the tension, the criticism, the manipulation. This is exactly what he relies on, the uncertainty that keeps her questioning her own perceptions, and the isolation that comes from believing that no one else would understand or believe her experience. It is important to recognize that this duality is deliberate. The public persona reinforces his control. When others see a man who appears loving, reasonable, and respectable, she may hesitate to speak out, feeling trapped by the fear of not being believed. She may even begin to blame herself for the disconnect, thinking, if he behaves this way in public, maybe I am exaggerating at home. Maybe I am the problem. And with every thought like that, the cycle of self-doubt tightens its grip, making it harder to reclaim her own voice, her own truth, and her own freedom. This public-private contrast also serves to manipulate perception outside the marriage. He can present a narrative that protects his ego and maintains social influence. When she tries to share her experience with friends or family, she may be met with disbelief, confusion, or defensiveness because the image he projects is so different from the reality she endures. She might feel silenced, misunderstood, and alone, wondering if anyone can ever truly see the man behind the mask. And that isolation deepens the emotional toll as she carries the full weight of her experience privately, unsure how to validate her own reality. But understanding this pattern is the first step toward liberation. Once she recognizes that his public charm is a mask, a tool of manipulation, she can stop questioning herself and start reclaiming her own truth. She can separate his carefully curated image from the reality of his behavior, realizing that neither his charm nor his social persona diminishes her experiences or her value. She begins to see clearly that she does not need validation from someone who cannot be authentic, nor from those who are misled by appearances. Her reality is hers, and it is valid no matter how convincing the performance he presents to the world. From that awareness comes empowerment. She can reclaim her life, her choices, and her voice. She can set boundaries, protect her emotional well-being, and refuse to be defined by someone else's manipulation or performance. She can trust her instincts, honor her feelings, and seek connections that are genuine and reciprocal. And in doing so, she steps out of the shadow of the man who controls the narrative and into the light of her own clarity, strength, and self-respect. No mask, no facade, no carefully crafted public image can ever take away the truth of who she is or the value she carries. She learns that her worth is not contingent on how others perceive her husband or how he manipulates appearances. She is not defined by his charm, his performance, or the lies he projects. She is defined by her courage, her resilience, and her ability to see clearly, to trust herself, and to live authentically. And in that truth lies freedom, because once she recognizes the contrast for what it is, once she refuses to let his performance dictate her reality, she steps into a life of empowerment, dignity, and self-respect that no one, no mask, no manipulation, no narcissistic control can ever take away.